company somewhere else and compete with us. Big disaster for American competitiveness. We also looked at the background of returnees. Why did they come here? Why did they leave? We found was they came here because of opportunity. They went back because they thought that the country would give them a better quality of life, and so on and so on. I don't have time to get into depth in all of this. We found was that they were doing much better back home than they were over here. That they were really happy to be with their family and friends. They found that the quality of life was better. Believe it or not, the Indians thought that the quality of life in India was better than it was here in America. The majority of them did. Chinese was a small majority. Indians was a significant majority. And they were also doing much better than they were doing over here. The sad thing for America is that the average age was young when they were at the prime of their careers. We're sending these young, highly educated masters and PhDs back home to compete with us. Okay, I'm going to switch gears completely and talk about entrepreneurship. This is we asked foreign students how they saw the future, and the vast majority of them said that they only wanted to stay here for a short period of time, and they thought that the best days of their home economies were much brighter than America. In other words, the grass is much, much greener back home than it is over here. Okay, now I'm going to give you a quick whirlwind tour of 3 major research projects which I've done on entrepreneurship. Okay. Read the myth section. That this is sort of the common belief over here that tech entrepreneurs tend to be unmarried, rich college dropouts obsessed with making money. And then that Ivy League education provides a huge advantage, and that venture capital is a prerequisite for economic growth. I'm going to show you what I've learned. First of all, the average age of a tech entrepreneur isn't young. The average age of a tech entrepreneur is 39. There are twice as many over 50 as there are under 25. There are twice as many over 60 as there are under 20. So this, all the stuff you read about kids being the key to boosting the US economy, false. Entrepreneurs tend to be middle-aged people. They're old guys or old gals. They tend to be married and have plenty of children. They don't come from rich families. The majority of them come from, there are very few in the extremes. There are very few extremely rich or extremely poor. If you're extremely rich, you're not motivated to become an entrepreneur. Dad will give you all the money you want. You're extremely poor, you'll never make it through that because you won't get the education you need. But it's really those who are hungry to rise above their heritage that become entrepreneurs. There's no surprise over here, but this goes against this myth that Bill Gates created, and of coming from entrepreneurs coming from rich families.
Is this U.S. or
US? This is U.S. All this entrepreneurship research is based on U.S. It's based on 3 projects in which we looked at samples of hundreds of entrepreneurs, very large sample sizes. They also tend to be very highly educated. Something like 94% of them or 96% of them had bachelor's degrees, and significant numbers had masters and PhDs in a wide variety. Unlike the Indians and Chinese, it wasn't all STEM. You had as many people doing arts and healthcare and business, accounting, finance, etc., as you did, in fact, more in business than in engineering. People who started tech companies. This is no surprise also that the entrepreneurs tend to be better educated than their parents. This is probably a common trend in American society anyway, that education has improved over time. This is a little bit of a joke, but it's true. That they did really well in high school, but not as well in college. And my thesis is that they drank too much. Speaking of personal experience. But this one doesn't do me very good when I presented at Harvard. Because what we found was that getting an Ivy League degree doesn't make that much of a difference. Getting an education makes a big difference. This is, on the left side, is the average of all startups. On the right side of your chart is the sales and headcount of companies started by founders with just a high school education. In the middle is with the Ivy League education. So the delta between the average and no education is huge. The delta between average and Ivy League isn't that significant. So all this money you pay to get into the Ivy League may not be worth it if you want to become an entrepreneur. They tend to be highly experienced, no surprise over here. More than half didn't come from entrepreneurial families. Now, if you look at this from a different perspective, if you came from an entrepreneurial family, you're more likely to be an entrepreneur. But not coming from an entrepreneurial family is not a prerequisite to becoming an entrepreneur. Why do people become entrepreneurs? A whole variety of reasons. The least important of which is that they couldn't find employment. You know, the myth is that entrepreneurs, tech entrepreneurs tend to be brash, arrogant, unemployable people. It's false. There are almost none like that. The vast majority did it because of other reasons, that they had a great idea, they wanted to build wealth before they retire, you know, they felt motivated, they always wanted to start a company, blah, 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 blah. And again, 70% of startups relied upon personal savings. Venture capital was only relevant in about 10%, 11% of successful startups. These are successful startups over the entire life. In other words, 90%, 9 out of 10 successful startup tech companies did not raise venture capital. So when you listen to regional policymakers, everyone talks about we need to bring these big venture capital funds in, we need to set aside $100 million for VC, blah, 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 blah. False. It's not the VCs who create the innovation, it's the entrepreneurs who create the innovation. I'm doing extensive new research in this area right now because I've written about this and I've taken a lot of fire from the venture capital community, and I'm going to rip their heads off now with solid research behind me. What we're doing is we're interviewing 250, we took a random sample of the entire venture capital database, all the companies that raised venture capital in the last 20 years, and we're going to interview a random sample of them and ask them at what stage do the VCs invest, what value do they provide, how do they make decisions, I mean, what happened when there were conflicts of interest between the needs of the venture capital firm and the needs of the company, how do they decide? It'll be interesting to see what we learn. So. Success factors, what makes people successful? It's all about experience, management, and luck. You know, I was surprised at how important good fortune was in our responses. A lot of people wrote in God and faith and so on. I didn't realize that entrepreneurs were such a pious lot. But I was surprised at how many responses we received to our survey and our interviews in which people talked about God being the critical, that they lucked out. That they talked about failure being really important to their success. All the things that they'd done wrong helped them become better entrepreneurs and so on and so on. I've written extensively about this. If you do a Google search on my name, or go to TechCrunch or BusinessWeek.com and do a search on my name, you'll see all sorts of articles I've written about these topics. Obstacles faced by entrepreneurs. I mean, if you look at the scale over here, entrepreneurs are a very optimistic bunch. They don't think anything stops them. You go to Silicon Valley, you see very little pessimism. Nothing stops an entrepreneur. When we asked entrepreneurs what stopped other people from following their footsteps, what stopped their peers who they were working with from following their footsteps, basically the number one factor was that people are afraid to become entrepreneurs. They're afraid of the amount of time and effort required, that they didn't have the money to do it, and so on and so on. All right, what I'll do is that I'll do Q&A here. And because I do want to talk a little bit about Russia and Chile and Japan, but I'll conclude with that. But let's do Q&A for 10 minutes before I talk about that.
Well, first of all, we have more time.
We do?
Yes, we don't have to finish at 10 up. So
all right.
We can just keep going, and there is a reception afterwards.
All right.
That I should have mentioned that everyone here is invited to, and maybe we can continue a conversation there.
Sure.
Please.
Then I can get into depth in any of these topics if we have the time. Please.
Please identify yourself and then ask our speaker questions.
My name is Nina Bachi. I'm a student here, and I'm also a policy analyst at the Independent Women's Forum. I was wondering if, in your data analysis, did you find any measurable differences between men and women?
You want to set me off, don't you? So Mina is your name?
Yeah, Mina.
Mina. That's a really, really, really good question. Because what happened after I published these studies was that I had the National Council for Women in Information Technology come to me and ask me the same question. And I had no clue. And they basically, then I had the Anita Borg industry come to me and ask me the same question. I had all these women's groups coming to me asking me the same exact question. I had a data set, but I had no clue. So I gave the data set to NC WIT to have them analyze it. In the meantime, I moved to Silicon Valley and I started writing for this tech blog called TechCrunch, which happens to be like off the charts in terms of readership. It's the single most popular tech blog in the world. And I went to their conference soon after I moved to Silicon Valley. And there were about 200 people on stage in the course of the evening. 2 women. One of them was an entertainer who was doing a circus act with her husband. Okay. The other one happened to be the CEO of TechCrunch. Not one of the company's profile had a woman in it. And my wife was there with me saying, Vivek, did you notice something was strange? There were no women there. I said, that is strange. And I came back and wrote to the TechCrunch people and said, what's going on? They got very defensive, saying that, well, 5 of the companies did have women in the founders, but they just weren't in the lead positions. And then I started looking more and more into it, and I started getting the data back from the NC WIT people. I wrote an article, then I started researching the data on women. I wrote a Business Week article, I wrote a TechCrunch article, we set off a firestorm in Silicon Valley. Because what I found was that only 1% of the founders of high-tech companies, as in Silicon Valley types of companies, had women founders. The proportion of tech companies with women founders was 3%. That the proportion of companies applying for venture capital had decreased by, by 75% over the past decade. The number of women studying computing had gone down from like 37% to about 18% or so over the course of 15 years. All the data I looked at was extremely negative about women. I wrote an article about it. And immediately I created a firestorm of criticism. I had people attacking me like you won't believe. Mostly young white males who felt threatened that I was bringing this women's issue up. And then I had women attacking me. And I said, hey, what's going on here? I mean, I've written about immigration. I get death threats. The stuff I've talked about immigration, I've written several articles and I get death threats. I mean, last conference I spoke at, they actually mailed a bullet to them, an M1 carbine, with a letter saying that you're coming to the biggest gathering of traders in recent times, come at your own peril. There were 2 keynote speakers, myself and a local senator in Seattle. The senator backed out. I went to it anyway, and there was FBI there, and I didn't get killed. So, sorry,
what was the constituency who was upset with you? Which?
The anti-immigrant crowd.
Anti-immigrant.
Yeah, because I was talking about the benefits of immigration, as you've seen in my slide, right? But anyway, the next.
I just want to know what to look out for.
Right, right. I didn't say I was talking about immigration over here. The next hardest issue that I've dealt with is women. So what happened? I started having women coming to me telling me their stories, and at the same time, the comment section of the TechCrunch, I had to start deleting messages because they were getting disgusting. I mean, there's a dearth of men strippers. Are you now going to lobby for the male stripper thing? Are you going to get laid after this, Vivek? I mean, I had VC friends telling me about the discussions they were having in their partner groups in Silicon Valley because I set such a firestorm off. So I wrote another article. I've written about 4 or 5 articles about this thing. In your face, and I've started a big fire. The New York Times has done a follow-up on it. Wall Street Journal has written about it. And now suddenly everyone in Silicon Valley is on the defensive about the dearth of women. But there's a serious problem there. That we're excluding half of our population. The data that when we did analyze it, we found was that there was no difference between women and men, literally. That they had the same motivations, the same ambitions. Almost every success factor was the same. The only slight differences were that women relied more on partners. They needed more encouragement from business partners, and they raised more money from it's very small differences. We had to look for statistical differences to really document that even. There was no difference between men and women. The trouble is that in Silicon Valley, at least, these VCs who all tend to be, the young, it's not the white male from investment banking and from wherever they are. They have this stereotype in their mind that the people that they found are either Indians, Chinese, or predominantly young, brash white males. So therefore, when a woman goes to get venture capital, they ask her questions like, well, what's going to happen? How does your husband feel about you running a company? What's going to happen when you have a baby? I mean, all these bizarro questions. Because like I said, now come in the midst of this debate. I've spoken to hundreds of women about it. There's a real problem there.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yes.
Concluding from your data, most of the entrepreneurs are older. You said 39 was the average
Yeah.
age, and you have many in the 50s.
Right.
I mean, women by that time are usually done with childbirth.
Yes.
And the other thing is that you also said that venture capitalists were really not that important. I think it was about 9.7%.
Yeah.
So you mentioned those as the major impediments right now, but it seems like overall, if you look at all the entrepreneurs, they don't play such a huge role. Why would they play such a huge role?
Because now I'm dealing with noise and myth. Silicon Valley still, cherishes venture capitalists and angel investors and so on, and people still believe that to succeed they need to raise venture capital. So I'm dealing with the noise over there versus the reality. The reality is that women can be very successful, but they get discouraged. What happens is when they join companies, it starts with childhood. Parents discourage their daughters from studying engineering and science.